Good morning. All right. Chapter 6. It's all about the Western Church during the Middle Ages. The Western Church of the Middle Ages gets blamed for basically all of Christianity's problems by famous people in certain religious groups. While it is true that many of the more problematic worship forms of the Roman Catholic Church can be traced right back to medieval innovations, not all of the innovations put into effect during this time were problematic. Scholars excuse me, have problems deciding on the exact beginnings of the Middle Ages in the West. But the earliest proposals cite the 5th century. Latin at this time was still the official language of the Roman Catholic Church, but it was beginning to disappear. French and German were beginning to replace Latin in the European marketplace for the common folk, people buying and selling, while Latin was reserved for those wealthy aristocrats and religious people such as monks or priests. Excuse me. Latin was used during church services with the exception of two parts of the service. The message, which was given in the common tongue of that area, and the small amounts of Greek that just refused to go away, such as Kyrie eleison, meaning Lord have mercy. There was essentially only one primary liturgical rite for the Church of the West, and that was the Roman Rite, even though other regions had modifications of their own that technically would have been considered rites. These included the Gallican, the Mozarabic, the Old Sarum, and the Milanese. The Roman Rite, as it was called, is now spoken of as the Mass, its Latin name being derived from the final words of the dismissal, Ita missa est. The Mass reflected the dual stress of word and sacrament, but the word was now in a hieratic language that was foreign to most of the hearers. This period also marked the separation of the clergy from the laity. This had become a simple matter of fact. The laity could no longer understand what the clergy were saying, and thus had no share in the community's worship. During this period, we find that more books are starting to be used during the services, and these were becoming icons of what was written in them. Some would say that these books gained too much reverence because they became the object of liturgical actions. They were placed reverently on the altar of the church, carried in procession, elevated, and incensed. These actions were heavily symbolic of the prominence of the book, especially for the book of the Gospels. There were several other books that came to have prominent places in the Western Church, such as the Sacramentary, the Antiphonal, and the Pontifical, among several others. The actual buildings of this period allowed a central worship space to be constructed whose ceiling could be much higher than the ones built in the earlier Romanesque style. The Gothic style of building became the model and norm for these church buildings. Buildings began to have tall and slender windows that would direct the gaze of the worshiper upwards towards God, among other things such as mosaics and stained glass windows. Many of the innovations that were set into place during this period remain around today, whether we as Protestant Christians deem them good or bad. Overall, this chapter was pretty interesting, learning about the beginnings of the Western Church, or what we know to be as the Western Church.